very clear, despite what was said by many of the leaders of the major banks that came before us last week or 2 weeks ago, that despite what they're saying that they're lending and maybe in large dollars to large Fortune 100s, that I went home last week and I heard over and over and over again from businesses, small and large, real estate, commercial, residential, this is not translating to our local markets. So one of the biggest things I keep hearing from people is, all right, well, you're talking about the second $350 billion, and yes, you're probably going to, hopefully, and that's what part of this conversation is, put all the necessary trappings in place, oversight, clear direction of what is supposed to be, what the money is supposed to be used for. But it takes me back to, well, we're not prepared just to leave that $350 billion out there on the table without a further interest in making sure that that money gets spent to help ease the credit market. And can you share with us, maybe start with Mr. Borofsky, your thinking on what it is that we can do as it relates in your research and oversight with the current, and maybe it's a question of our policy, you have to make some recommendations to us as Congress, and we come back and whether we do it after the fact or we have a lot of interest in these institutions, regulatorily and otherwise, to get them to take necessary steps to ease the credit market. That is the biggest problem that I heard right now out there. What can you do? These banks that took all this money, what can you do to get them to start lending to reasonably, underwritten borrowers? We're not talking about any kind of bad loans. We're talking about solid, credit-worthy people. Can you share with us some of your thinking on what you're seeing?
I think a theme that all of us keep returning to is transparency, and whether it's transparency for Treasury or it's transparency for those who've received the funds. And the way we're trying to contribute to answer your question is by doing this audit on how are they using the funds. And GAO has recommended and Treasury is implementing its survey on lending and the impact of the TARP on lending. And our survey is a broader one on overall use of funds. So we hope that by doing that and being able to report back to Congress how the first tranche, the first 350 or so entities up to January 31st have spent the money, that we can give you that data and give you that answer, and therefore be able to make recommendations based on that hard data.
Well, I want to just point out transparency is absolutely essential because we want to understand it. But is there a gap here, or is there a lack of standards, a lack of expectations, a lack of teeth that is missing from this original bill that said you take the money, and the fact that they're going to end up reporting to us what they did or didn't do with it may not solve the problem of how do we get this money to be put into the market for lending?
I think the question of what conditions are attached is certainly a policy-based decision that needs to be addressed to meet your concerns. I think that the administration has indicated in its announcement of the programs that there may be more requirements on how the institutions use the funds. We'll see as those programs are rolled out.
A couple of points I'd add. First of all, there's about $50 billion of the first amount of money, the $350 billion figure, that hasn't been allocated yet to the banks. There are still dozens, if not hundreds, of institutions in the pipeline that the regulatory agencies are looking at and making recommendations to Treasury. Second major point is, we made recommendations that those entities provide monthly reports on their lending activities, and Treasury hasn't implemented that recommendation on the first half. They've indicated that they'd look at it for the second half. We still think that needs to be put in place.
And that can be done right now.
They'd have to renegotiate the agreements. The ones that they haven't executed yet, they could still do it, and it could be done.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's something we ought to be speaking to Treasury about. I mean, as we want transparency, there's no reason we can't go back on the original money that was allocated and get these institutions to participate with us.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Ms. Warren?
I would only add to that, Congressman, I think you're exactly right about this. But this goes back not only to transparency, but to about clearly delineated goals. If this is about putting money into the hands of small businesses that have done most of the job creation outside the public sector, then you make that part of the terms of taking the money. And if someone doesn't want to do that with the money, then don't let them have the money. It's that straightforward.
And I know my time is running out, but I think that's a very important point. I know our small business community, which we're also concerned about, is not getting access to this. The large businesses are in many cases, but Mr. Chairman, I think we really need to focus on getting some strong criteria. If they receive money, small businesses are given a high level of focus.